Good morning, everybody. This is Andrew Jordan again for another episode of Talmud for the Perplexed. I wanted to just finish up the first chapter of the Mishnah that we started together, which helped us unpack some of the themes, broadly speaking, of rabbinic Judaism and the Talmud. So we left off and we were looking at the text here in Mishnah 2, which was talking about when to recite the morning Shema. So I want to look over here at the next few Mishnayot, and we're actually just going to look at the Mishnah today for most of the rest of the chapter here, and then a brief section from the Talmud to demonstrate a different point, but somewhat unrelated. So we'll start with the third Mishnah. Let me just put it like that. There we go. Okay, so we talked about the morning Shema, first the evening Shema in the first Mishnah. In the second Mishnah, we talked about the morning Shema, and now in the third Mishnah, we're going to talk about the position of how we are supposed to say the text of the Shema. And just if you remember, we were talking about the text of the Shema, which I think I'm going to just pull up quickly here so we can recall what it is. And the Shema, as we remember, is recited in the morning and the evening. And so we'll look just to remind ourselves of what the Shema looks like. And we have, here we go. So the Shema, remember, is the verses from Deuteronomy and Numbers. So, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And so if you go and you see the notes, it's going to tell you some more things. The details are not all that important. But so we go over here and we have, then the second text is the Ve'ahavta. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, etc. And you can see that here, the Hebrew text, and then we go down to the next paragraph, V'hayim Shamoa, and that's we've already talked about this, so we are not going to review in detail what these are. And the last one is Vayomer Hashem el Moshe Lemor, and we see here that this is the one that refers to the Tzitzit. So we are back over in the Mishnah, and we are talking about so we know we have to say in the evening, in the morning, and when that is. So the next question the Mishnah asks is, what position do we need to be in when we say the Shema? So we're going to be looking at part of the text here, which I'll just find it over here in the Ve'ahavta. So we're going to go find here, and we have Ubeshoch becha ubkumecha. That's kind of our text that we're going to work from right now, which is right here. And when you lie down and when you rise. So this was the text, if you recall, that was used to prove that we start with the evening before the morning, if you recall from the first Mishnah. So we're going to go back to that. And we're going to think about it for a second. And it says when you lie down and when you rise. Okay. So what does that mean? Does that mean that does this just referring to the time of the day? Is it referring to evening and morning, respectively? Or is it referring more literally to that in the evening, we literally need to lie down or recline to recite this Shema. And then when in the morning, we have to be standing. So that's the question that we're going to think about for a little bit here. And we might actually go to the Gemara for a little bit and look at this. But so we're going to start with Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. Okay, so we're going to talk about them in a second. But first, let's just look and see what we have here. So we have Bet Shammai Omrim. They say in the evening you have to recline, and in the morning you have to stand. That's basically what they say. So they're reading this literally, the proof text. Okay. And so they point us back to the proof text and they say this is what it means. We have to stand, we have to lie down, and we have to stand up literally. Beit Hillel says no, that's not correct. Every person will just say Shema in whatever position they're in. You don't need a special position. And that's basically what it's saying, is that this is referring to the time of the day. So like when people lie down and when they wake up, not telling you a specific posture that you need to do. This is not like rubrics in the, if you're familiar with kind of like Roman Catholic liturgy, there is a there are specific instructions. You know, you need to do this, you need to stand up, and you need to put your hands like this and that, etc. So Beit Hillel is saying, no, that's not the case. It's just saying what time of day it is. Okay, so then we have Rabbi Tarfon comes in, and he's telling us a story that's going to serve a point in the Gemara. So he says, I was coming down the road, and I decided it was time to do Shema, so I reclined in the way that Beit Shammai says to do. So, and what happened is he got in danger because of this, because of highwaymen, which they say is listim, okay, who were, robbing him basically. So the sages, the hachamim, say, you didn't do this the right way because you were supposed to do Beit Hillel and you didn't really need to recline, but you did according to Beit Shammai, and that was not good. So basically, it's telling us that Beit Hillel is the way that we're supposed to read this, and Beit Shammai is wrong. Now let's unpack a little bit about the people mentioned here. Beit Shammai is Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is referring to two schools of thought in first century Pharisaic Judaism before the rabbinic period, referring to the founders Hillel and Shammai. We'll look at them in a second. They were kind of thought of as rival houses, rival legal interpretations of halakha, Jewish law. And essentially, what happens is that Beit Hillel wins out on most matters. So rabbinic Judaism tends to follow Beit Hillel in most cases. And we'll see Rabbi Tarfon is also a late first century, early second century rabbi who was a priest. Who lived in kind of the northern part of Israel and was really an opponent of early Jewish Christianity. If you check out my blog at drajordan.com, drajordan.com, you can see some of my writings about Rabbi Tarfon and Jewish Christianity. A very interesting backstory there. Important to know what these people were about. So let's take a break from here for a second. And we're going to hop over to Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of the fathers, as we were talking about in the first Mishnah. And we're going to look at the Hillel and Shammai, the people themselves, and the traditions associated with them more. So we can see over here that Hillel and Shammai received the tradition from Avtalia and Shemaiah, who are two proselytes to Judaism, who became part of the chain of transition of the oral Torah. So they received the Torah from them, and then it's going to give us a few statements from each one, and we can kind of learn a little bit about Shammai and Hillel from looking at the statements attributed to them. So Hillel says, "Be of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace, pursuing peace, loving mankind, and drawing them close to the Torah." Okay, so that's kind of a universalistic value. Hillel also said, "One who does not add to his knowledge causes it to cease." So you need to always be practicing and learning to reinforce what you know. And then one who does not study Torah deserves death. Okay, that's interesting. And one who makes unworthy use of the crown should pass away. We're not going to go into detail about what all these mean, but you can see a kind of a different shade of meaning here. A very famous quote here: "If I am not for myself, who is for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" This is another statement of Hillel. Okay, the final, and then we go to Shammai, which we only have one saying here in Pirkei Avot, which you can see is kind of interesting that because Shammai was not the one who won the legal battle, so to speak. So we only have one saying here: "Make your study of Torah a fixed practice, speak little but do much, and receive all men with a pleasant countenance." Now this is kind of interesting because Shammai has a bit of a different reputation in the sort of a record here. And I'm going to see if I can actually just pull it up. I want to find an example. And that is kind of a more a better representation of what Shammai was all about, which I can see if I could find it here. And it has to do, it's a sort of series of stories about these Gentiles who come to convert to Judaism. And there's 3 different stories. So I think I found it here in Tractate Shabbat. So let's see if we can find where it starts. Okay, so here we go. The sages tell us a story about a Gentile who came to Shammai to convert to Judaism, basically. And so he says, how many Torahs do you have? And Shammai says, well, there are 2. There's the written Torah and the oral Torah. Okay. The Gentile says, well, that's great, but I just want to follow the written Torah. So, but I don't like the oral Torah. So I would like to convert, but not follow the oral Torah. And Shammai gets mad at him and yells at him, basically. And, says that's not how it's supposed to be. You got to do both. Then the same guy goes over to Hillel and asks him the same question. And Hillel says, okay. Sure. So he converted him right away and began teaching him Torah. And then he started teaching, Hillel started teaching this man the letters of the alphabet. It says Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. It goes through the alphabet. Next day he did it backwards. And then the new convert says to him, but you didn't tell me that, right? So he didn't say, like, he didn't teach him the order of the letters, basically. And then so Hillel says, well, you were relying on me, right? And then the convert says, yeah. So basically he was teaching him the principle of oral Torah without actually teaching him that there was oral Torah. So you can see the difference of approach here, that Shammai was very literalistic, so to speak, and Hillel was a little bit more flexible, but they had the same goals in mind. It was more a style of what they were doing. There's more stories about these conversion stories that continue, and they're kind of interesting, so I'll just read them really quickly. So the next one, another guy goes to Shammai and says, convert me, but you have to teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And so Shammai says he thinks that's ridiculous and pushes him away, and doesn't want to do that. But Hillel says, okay. He converted him, and then he said, basically the golden rule, which is what is hateful to you, do not do to another person. And that's the entire Torah, and everything else is commentary or interpretation. That's a very famous passage of Talmud. Go and study. Sorry, I forgot to add that at the end. And then finally, there's a third incident where another Gentile comes and says that he would like to. Is there one more? No, sorry, it keeps going. It's a different. Oh no, here, sorry, yeah, there is one other part of it, which is, so the Gentile says that he would like to be converted, but he would like to become the high priest, which is not possible because you need to be descended patrilineally from the correct tribe, and you can't convert into that, basically. So Shammai says, okay, he chases him away. Again, he's not down for that. But Hillel says, okay, fine, I'll convert you. And then, so Hillel says to the new convert, is it not the way of the world that only one who knows the protocols of royalty is appointed king? Go and learn the royal protocols by engaging in Torah and studying it. And then the convert went and read the Bible, read the Torah, and he returned and talked to Hillel, and he says, oh, well, and the common man that draws near shall be put to death, referring to Numbers. And Hillel says then later, with regard to whom is the verse speaking? Hillel asked the guy. The convert asks Hillel, well, who is he talking about? And then Hillel says it's talking about even David, the king of Israel. So then the convert makes a kal vachomer argument, a fortiori comment, inference, saying, if the Jewish people are God's children and the love that God had for them, he dared to call them, Israel is my son, my firstborn, is written about them, the common man that draws near shall be put to death. A mere convert who came without merit, with nothing to add, more than his staff and a traveling bag, all the more so does this apply for him. So he's basically kind of figured it out. He's saying this, I don't think that I can do this. So, so you can see the interesting difference in personality that these guys had in their way of presenting Torah. We're not precisely sure how much of this goes back to them and the historicity of everything, but it's sort of beyond the point at this case because they represented some sort of school that included probably a small nucleus of sayings that were maybe attributed to them. And really, actually, I'd like to point something out that I was thinking about the other day really quickly. In Pirkei Avot, And I think this might be more interesting for some of the audience. Um, and that is, so in the Pirkei Avot, we have different sayings. So I know that most of you probably heard that Yehoshua ben Parachia in the Talmud is associated with, of course, Jesus the Nazarene, um, which is interpreted by different factions to be different things. Definitely of the opinion that that's referring to the Christian Jesus. There's no reason for it not to be the case. There's no aspect of the interpretation that would lead it for it not to be that. But anyway, that's not really the case. But if you look at it here, you can see, and the point is not really about, well, it is about Jesus, but in a different way. So we can see that Yehoshua ben Parachia, there's one saying that's attributed to him in the entire section here. And really in the Talmud in general, there's not much attributed to him, a few other sayings. But he says, appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion and judge all men with like in their favor, favorably, basically. Okay, so there's a saying here, and you can see like his companion Nittai the Arbalite said, "Keep a distance from the evil neighbor. Do not become attached to the wicked, and do not abandon faith in divine retribution." Very interesting sayings that are attributed to them, but only one saying each. Right, we had 3 for Hillel, and as we go forward, we'll see more and more sayings attributed to people. So what I wanted to point out is that I think actually something like this was probably what you could say about the historical Jesus. We know that he was probably a healer and a teacher of some kind, without getting too much into debate about what kind of teacher or what kind of healer or what kind of this or that. But it's most likely, I think, that the historical Jesus' teachings are probably very small, like a very small number of teachings go back to him. And you would need this small collection of teachings to be open enough to different matters of interpretation to explain the different early Christianities that existed. We've got to explain for Jewish Christianity, for the Christ cult under Paul, for the Gnostic, proto-Gnostic movement, for the Johannine community. So we really need to explain for a lot of these different currents in early Christianity. So we needed sayings that are going to be open enough to interpretation where you could run with that and see how it could develop naturally. So I'm speaking off the cuff here, but I'm working on something related to this. So it's on my mind. And so maybe you could have a small core of sayings like the common sayings tradition presented by Crossan, or other proposals where that you could start with something small and it would develop into a bigger corpus that was sort of added to later, which is essentially what happened with Hillel and Shammai. I'm pretty sure that they didn't say everything that was attributed to them, but the school developed and began to apply their thinking in different contexts. And that's how we get the number of stories that happen later. So that was the third Mishnah. I'm going to just go quickly through these last 2 in the chapter just to kind of show you the chapter. And here you can see we actually kind of got into a Gemara type of conversation where we used themes that were linked to each other, and that got us to be talking about something that was not really related to what we started off talking about. And this is what happens in the Gemara. And if you are interested in historical Jesus studies and the Talmud and Jesus, you'll need to understand that when you analyze the text as why they are placed where they are, why they're scattered, why there's not a centralized narrative about the historical Jesus in the Talmud. It's because of the way the Talmud works, and how these conversations spring off of each other and they're linked together by common themes. So we sort of did a little bit of Gemara just there, and simulated what that was like. The next Mishnah is basically just talking about the blessings before and after Shema, which is not really important for what I want to do in this video. So I'm going to skip over that one. If you'd like to read it later, it could be interesting. I do want to highlight this one really quickly before jumping into one other part of the Gemara in Berakhot. a little bit further down the line. So here is Mishnah number 5, and it talks about the Exodus from Egypt, which is an important aspect of rabbinic Judaism. Sorry about that. And so this part here is talking about the Exodus from Egypt, and we have some characters. We can see, this was a 2nd century rabbi who's talking about the Exodus of Egypt at nighttime, particularly. Another character here, you can see he's also around the same time. And we have a proof text, which is talking about that we're supposed to remember the day of leaving Egypt, all of the days of your life. And this is part of the Passover Haggadah. So it just shows the importance of the Exodus story and the rabbinic narrative. I know there's quite a lot of debate about the historicity of all of that. But from a mythic national perspective, which is what it is in Judaism, it's meant to be the national myth. Historicity is not really that important in terms of forming identity, and most nations do this. One can think about the United States of America, for example, which is founded on a number of myths that are not necessarily true, but are meant to show the common values that the people have in common. For example, the USA, for example, is built on the ideas of freedom, liberty, democracy, those kind of things. And we have even stories, the George Washington and the cherry tree, and other stories, the peaceful Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving. Most of these are not necessarily historical accounts, but they're meant to show the sort of common bond that a nation has together. And sometimes the history of it is quite contradictory. The Declaration of Independence proclaims liberty for all, but at the time of when it was written, only free white men could vote, and there was enslaved people. So it is an idea more than history, so to speak, and that's what the Exodus from Egypt is in rabbinic Judaism. It's an idea that shapes how the rabbinic Jewish community and the Karaites think about themselves and who they are. And so that's something. If you go to a Passover Seder, we have the story is about leaving Egypt, and it's reenacted every year at the Seder. So I just wanted to show that because it's important to know the importance of the Exodus from Egypt in the rabbinic narrative. And I wanted to just do one more bit of Gemara here, which is kind of interesting. It's a little bit later in Berakhot, and it's not really tied to what we were doing before, but it's an important principle, I think, for you to see. And just because we're on Berakhot, I could include this in the video, and which is right here where it says, "Come and hear Tashema." So we're talking about human dignity, and human dignity is so great that it can override a prohibition in the Torah. Okay, so that's going to require a little bit of unpacking. Why? The Gemara asks, why is this so? And it says, well, there's a text that says here, there is neither wisdom nor understanding nor counsel against the Lord. Okay, and we could figure out what that is. Well, that's different, but maybe this is a baraita. But okay, so we look here, and then it says Bar Shava interpreted the prohibition of what we're talking about here about human dignity and its overriding of Torah principles. And so he's referring back to Deuteronomy, which is over here, which is saying that you're not supposed to deviate from the rulings of the judges at all. So what is this business of human dignity and this? So he laughs. He says, this is the yeshiva people laugh at him, saying, you can't deviate from this. This is Torah law. So you can't really, how can human dignity be more important than Torah law? That doesn't make any sense. And so then Rav Kahana, let's get information. So he's a later, this is a 4th and 5th century rabbi. If we mean 5, we could also mean 4 or 3 or 2 or 1. So which one is this? We don't know. I don't actually know which one is being referred to, but it could be any of these people. So you can see where you can get kind of complicated to figure out exactly what's going on. If we really wanted to know, we could see if it says anything in the commentary, but I'm not really that concerned about who it is. So he's talking about Rav Kahana, and so there's a great man who spoke, and he's saying like you shouldn't laugh. Talking about the yeshiva students, they shouldn't laugh about this because the rabbis, the sages, derive the idea of base rabbinic law on the prohibition of in Deuteronomy that we're talking about, which is not deviating from the Torah law. However, due to certain cases for concern for human dignity, the sages permit some suspension of rabbinic law. And now this is important. And rabbinic Judaism, as we were saying in the first video of this series, is that it's essentially built on the fence around the Torah. So the Torah has laws that are written in the first 5 books of Moses in the Hebrew Bible, and those are called midoraita. Doraita laws. Those are biblical laws from the written Torah, and then the rabbis derive their own laws through a series of techniques of interpretation and logical argumentation, which are called derabanan, or rabbinic laws. So the rabbinic laws are a little bit more flexible, and you can suspend them in certain cases due to human dignity. So there's a case of carrying on Shabbat, which you're allowed to carry stones to use in cleaning yourself after using the restroom. And it's going to show a case here down below about a specific, example of this, which has to do with a priest. The priests are supposed to avoid ritual impurity, which is caused by death. So, which means you wouldn't be able to go to a cemetery. And so let's see what it says here. So the priest, and it's talking about a lost object, was in a cemetery. So he could I'm just going to skip over it. This kind of gets complicated, and I don't want to go on for a long time. So let me just cut it short here and just say that what I wanted to point out is that the principle of human dignity overriding rabbinic law shows another case where you're going to have and I want to be careful how I say this, but sort of a non-fundamentalist approach to this, although there are plenty of Jewish fundamentalists which are problematic in their own way, but even they would acknowledge that there are cases when Torah law can be overridden, and we'll look at them because I think they're important. And one is this. Another case that we'll talk about later is called pikuach nefesh, which is a principle of saving human life on Shabbat. So you may be aware there are a number of prohibitions about what can be done on Shabbat. However, if someone is in danger of dying, one can break any Torah prohibition to save a person's life. In fact, is required to do so in order to save life. And so there's a number of debates about when that applies and the details of that. But just the overall principle is important to know as one approaches rabbinic Judaism. And a lot of times the debates in the Gemara are framed around human dignity, like we saw in the principles. We're kind of concerned about being lenient and being providing a fence around the Torah. These are all value statements that we've seen as we analyze the Mishnah. So that is the end of Berakhot, chapter 1 of the Mishnah. We're not going to go through chapter by chapter of each Mishnah. I'm going to jump around and point out different passages in the Talmud that show an interesting point of view, or show like a principle of Judaism in action. And I'll start in Berakhot and just go through and see different ones that seem the most interesting, the most salient. But I hope that was interesting. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.